puts forth ideas of developmental psychology, that as children grow from infants to adults, we all go through different stages of development. And it's important to remember here that development isn't always linear for players, and that they will all go through different stages at different times.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, I'm excited to welcome Zac Crawford to the podcast. Zac is a former soccer player and coach, and now serves as a Grassroots Coach Educator for U.S. Soccer, which you'll hear more about in this episode. In this conversation, we talk about the U.S. Soccer Grassroots Player Development Framework, the 3 frames of development, how coaches may need to change, and the 4 core values of U.S. Soccer. If you enjoyed this episode and want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode. And coaches, we wrapped up our first annual summer coaching series, and you can still get access to the video replays, audio-only replays, coaching notes, and more from all 12 sessions at summercoachingseries.com. You can check out the incredible lineup of guests we had and what other coaches had to say about their experience at summercoachingseries.com. And one note about this episode before we hop in. This conversation was recorded live at a coaching convention, so there may be a bit of background noise at times, but we did our best to edit the audio to bring you the highest quality possible. Now to my conversation with Zac Crawford. Enjoy the episode. Coaches, really excited to welcome Zac Crawford to the podcast today. Zac is a Grassroots Coach Educator for U.S. Soccer. Zac, thanks so much for joining me, and I would love it if you started off by just taking a few seconds to share your brief coaching bio and kind of the educational journey you've been on too, and what you currently do.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Luke, for having me this morning or today, whenever the listeners are hearing this. Really excited to be here with you and share a little bit about what we do at U.S. Soccer. So, yeah, to answer your question, I grew up a multi-sport athlete, playing soccer, baseball, basketball, floor hockey, all these sports in Memphis, Tennessee. I think that helped me be a well-rounded person. And I was lucky enough to get a college scholarship in soccer. I went and played at Bethel College in McKenzie, Tennessee. And from there, I went down to the University of Alabama and pursued a PhD in cognitive psychology. I did all but dissertation there and ended up getting a second master's degree in human performance and sport management. And while I was there, I started coaching at a local high school. And I coached for about 5 years before I started to seek out formal coach education. And once I started to seek that formal coach education out through U.S. Soccer, and at the time through the NSCAA, which is now United Soccer Coaches, I worked my way up both ladders. So there was an ability to jump over from one level to the next between the two organizations. And I love learning. I think coaches need to be lifelong learners. And so I worked my way up both of those ladders because I think it's important to start at the foundational level before jumping in at a intermediate or advanced level to really understand where players are coming from before they get to you at perhaps an older age at high school or college level even.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your journey there. And, I think that segues well into, I know, what you already presented on at the clinic and a big part of your work with U.S. Soccer. And that is just making sure that we are providing a developmentally appropriate experience for the athletes at whatever age and stage they're at. And before we started recording, you were sharing with me just a little bit about the framework that U.S. Soccer uses. And I'd love if you just kind of briefly walked us through those ages and stages of development that you guys use at U.S. Soccer.
Yeah, so we have a grassroots player development framework that basically puts forth ideas of developmental psychology, that as children grow from infants to adults, we all go through different stages of development. And it's important to remember here that development isn't always linear for players, and that they will all go through different stages at different times. So what I mean by that is development is not linear. It's not always going to be an upward progression for them. Sometimes it's one step forward, two steps back. Sometimes it's more of a systems approach where there's a lot of interconnected and interrelated aspects that are all influencing player development. And it's not necessarily a linear approach or a mechanistic approach where you have a couple of inputs and you expect a certain output. So it's really important, Luke, to understand who is in front of you and what are their needs. And as these children go through different ages and stages of development, we use developmental psychology in 3 frames within the framework to look at how they develop. The first one is cognitive. The cognitive frame is thinking, memory, learning, perception, attention. That's a really important one. If you think about a 6-year-old versus a 16-year-old, they definitely have different levels of cognitive development. A 6-year-old is very egocentric. They do not want to share. So if you're out there trying to get 5-year-olds to share the toy, it's going to be
the ball.
Exactly. That's what I mean. The toy is the ball
Yes.
for them at that age, and they don't want to share it. And so that's because they're very egocentric at that age. They have short attention spans. So if that's their player behavior, as coaches, we have to adapt to their needs and give shorter, more concise instructions to them. A 16-year-old can start to think ahead. They can think in abstract terms. They can think about, if I do this, then this can occur. So cognitive is a really important frame to look through. The second frame is psychomotor. So how do their bodies and brains develop as they go through these stages? We know that at the younger age groups, kids need to learn how to move their bodies. This simple idea of physical literacy, learning how to move your body, twist, turn, run, jump, fall down and get back up again. Those are such important life skills to lay at a foundational level when they're younger so they can ultimately grow up and have the athletic skills to pursue whatever pathway, whether that's participation or performance, and they have the fundamental physical literacy to be able to do that. You can also think about the growth spurt when kids get to 11, 12, 13 years old, and then different differences between the sexes and how girls go through the growth spurt before boys do, and how when kids are going through that stage, they can be quite awkward because their bones are growing a little bit faster than their muscles, and sometimes they can be hunched over, or from one season to the next, you may see the kids shoot up 6 inches and they're really struggling with adapting to their body. So how do we create these environments that adapt to those types of needs? The third frame would be psychosocial. So how do they interact with their own, how do they understand their own emotions? And then how do they interact with others? So psychosocial is really important as they go through these ages and stages of development because it will have an impact on their self-efficacy and how much they believe in themselves. And that is a real key performance indicator on whether or not these kids are going to stay involved in sport and ultimately stay involved in the game. So those 3 frames were cognitive, psychomotor, and psychosocial. And as coaches, we have to understand that all players have unique potential. We need to adapt to the needs of the players in order to help each individual achieve his or her potential. And understanding developmental psychology and the child stages and ages of development is really important to create those player-centered environments where individuals can develop.
Yeah, I really like what you hit on there with the recognition that essentially it requires different skills from coaches at different ages and stages based on where they're at developmentally. I had the chance to interview a guy named Sefu Bernard from our podcast a while back who has been in player development with the Washington Mystics, a WNBA team for a while. Really sharp guy. He also does a lot of stuff in the youth basketball space as well. But we were talking about this similar idea of, age-appropriate development. And he said something that I thought was really fascinating and resonated with me. He said, Greg Popovich is my favorite coach in the NBA. But I would not sign my kid up, my 6-7-year-old kid, to play for Greg Popovich. He's like, and that's not a knock on Greg Popovich. I think he's a great coach, but I don't think he's equipped to coach my 6 or 7-year-old, right? Like he has skills to coach adults, professionals, right? There's a very different set of skills needed to coach 6 to 8 year olds or 10 to 12 year olds or 13 to 18 year olds even. And just recognizing that as coaches, I think maybe culturally what's happened is we look at the coaches at the highest level of the sport and we think they're succeeding at that level. I should do what they're doing at this level. And that just doesn't fit who's in front of us. And like you started off, it really starts off by asking who's in front of us and what do they need? Because the answer to that for a 10 to 12 year old is very different than an NBA player that Greg Popovich is coaching or the guys on the US national team, right? Like it is different. And it's so important that as coaches, we recognize it's not that we must adjust to where they are, not forcing them to adjust to our style.
Yeah, that's spot on, Luke. I mean, Greg Popovich, great coach. I know you went to University of Arkansas, I went to the University of Alabama. So I spent many years coaching in Alabama, which is very much an American football dominated state. And so there you have Nick Saban, arguably one of the greatest college football coaches of all time. But if you look at how Coach Saban fared in the NFL, it was different because those players had different needs. But he's found his niche in college coaching. But that doesn't mean what he does and how he treats his players will fit for how we work with children. So being able to understand who's in front of us and what are their needs can be quite challenging, especially for the youth coach, because you're going to have several different developmental levels. All the players will be in different developmental stages. They're going through them all at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we get to know each individual on our team and understand how that person, that player, is developing both on and off the field. And using those 3 frames that I mentioned earlier will really help you understand what their needs are, and then you create the environment that tailors and fits to their needs. So we often think that coach behavior influences player behavior. And I would say that's a very coach-centered philosophy. And many American sports are coach-centered because they depend on the coach making decisions for the players. But sports like basketball, like soccer, that are invasion games, that are constantly flowing from attacking to defending and the transition moments in between require players to make decisions, to read the game, to make decisions, and to solve problems. And they cannot do that if us as coaches are constantly telling them where to go and what to do. And the same thing with the parents on the sideline as well. So we have to create these environments that are player-centered instead of coach-centered, so that player behaviors means that we understand how they behave and then how do their behaviors influence our behaviors as coaches. Instead of, like you said, expecting them to adapt to us, we need to adapt to them.
Yeah, that's so spot on. Before we get into kind of the specific model that you guys have for the different ages and stages of development, I'd love if you talked a little bit more about a player-centered environment and maybe like practically what does that look like for coaches? How do we begin to create that? I know that's big and broad and there's probably a lot to it, but what are some ways that we can start to shift to that player-centered environment?
So at US Soccer, we have 4 core values that we believe all licensed coaches should have. And we believe these core values will help you create these types of player-centered environments. We believe that licensed coaches should be able to create a positive, supportive, and challenging learning environment. And challenging being key there, because we know that if the environment for the child is too challenging, what happens? They get frustrated and they end up giving up and quitting. On the reverse end, if the environment is too easy for them, they get bored and they end up quitting as well. So the challenge is important. But the 4 core values that we have are enjoyment and fun, dignity and respect, safety, and development. And when we talk about enjoyment and fun, we're talking about for all players. They come to training, they come to the games to have fun, to play, to be with their friends. They need to get a lot of touches on the ball. They didn't come to run laps around the field. This is soccer. It's not a track team. They
came to play. They came to play the game.
Yes.
Playing the game is fun. That's why we all started playing the game.
And that's why we stay in it.
Yeah.
So we got to have fun. I mean, that's clear. And if, as coaches, if we're not having fun, you can almost guarantee that they're not having fun as well. So making sure that all kids enjoy themselves, even though less gifted. We don't treat players differently based on where they're from or how they look or what their skill level is. We as coaches must create this fun environment, which kind of leads into dignity and respect. So regardless of their ability level, we treat each player with dignity and respect. And we were talking a little bit before we got started here about how we see coaches berating players, berating referees, and it ultimately causes dropout for both the player and the referee. So can we have an environment with dignity and respect for all players that really is free from, this kind of moves into the third value, safety, not just free from physical harm, but psychological harm as well, bullying, harassment, discrimination. Those are the types of things that we need to prevent as coaches, and not just with our own teams, but if we see it happening with other coaches treating children like that, I believe we have an obligation to stand up and protect those kids because they don't have the voice, and we need to be the voice for them. And so then that kind of takes us, we move into our fourth value, which is development. They come to learn. We believe children have two basic needs. They want to have fun and they want to learn. You can maybe add in a third one of belonging. We all want to, feel included. But this development aspect is back to that idea of challenge, finding the appropriate level of challenge for them so they can succeed. It's also about learning life lessons, right? Sport can be so great, but it can also be so negative. And so you can learn great life lessons like teamwork and collaboration through a positive sport experience. And ultimately, that's what will keep kids in the game. So they can ultimately learn how to win, right? They can play their best and strive to win, but they can also learn through losing as well. We're not saying that they don't strive to win. Yeah, every time we step out there, we want to do our best. We want to compete. But winning's not always the ultimate measure of success. If you're a coach out there, I think one key measure of success is, do your kids come back the next season? And that really should be a key indicator for you on whether you're successful or not. It's not the trophy. It's not how many goals you scored or how many points you scored or whatever, in basketball or other sports. It's about making sure those kids have this positive experience that they want to keep coming back to year and year over and over again.
It's such a good point. And I think that is so important, especially at the youth level, right? Before they really hit that performance stage, maybe as they become teenagers into high school, to really, really emphasize, hey, one of our markers of success here is that this season ends and your son or daughter wants to know when the next season starts.
Yeah.
They want to play again. And that should change and drive so much of what we do, again, with our coaching. That, okay, actually, I'm going to make sure that every kid plays on my team, because you want to know what's going to make a kid not want to come back and play next year? Sitting on the bench during a game.
Yeah.
And like you said, this is not about winning a 5th grade trophy. I think this is about enjoyment, those core values that you guys just mentioned, in hopes of them wanting to continue to grow and develop in that game. And I think the other thing that's so important that you've hit on a couple times is finding that ideal challenge level, right? We don't want it too hard. We don't want it too easy. I'm forgetting the research term for it right now that's become popularized, but that sweet spot of struggle, but still achieving success, feeling growth, because that's what keeps all of us coming back to whatever we do, not just sport, life, right? Like when we feel ourselves improving and growing at something, it's kind of an addictive thing. And the same is true for the people that we coach. When they feel and see themselves getting better individually as a team, man, it just becomes so reinforcing, and they want more and more of that. And I think it's so, so important that we really keep those things at the forefront of our mind as we're creating practices, as we're coaching in games, as we're, communicating to parents, stakeholders, all of that. I think it's so important, to keep those things on the front of our mind.
Yeah, it's spot on, Luke. I mean, we create these player-centered environments where players can make decisions, and we support them through those decisions. They're going to make wrong decisions. They're going to make mistakes along the way, and that's part of it, the environment that we need to create that's safe. Another thing you said there that resonated with me is part of dignity and respect. And this is a bit of a controversial aspect of that core value, is that we believe that all players should play at least 50% of the game. We should treat them with dignity and respect, that they came to play, they came to have fun. Some coaches have issues with this. Well, this kid's not as good as the other kids, and I've got to win this league because the parents are going to leave and take the players to another team, and I'm going to lose my job. And it's unfortunate that there's a lot of pressure that coaches feel like that. But I believe education is the best tool that we have for that, for coaches to equip themselves, to arm themselves with education, like understanding developmental psychology. So not only to create these environments for their players, but also to interact with the rest of the ecosystem, to manage their performance environment. That's one of the 6 tasks of a U.S. soccer coach. It's not just about coaching games and coaching training sessions. It's also about leading the player and establishing that individual relationship, like we talked about. It's about leading the team. How do you create a group of people with co-constructing goals, not telling them what their goals are, but co-constructing together? Managing the performance environment, which at the grassroots level is very much the parents, and educating the parents to understand these stages and ages of development that children go through, and that the child's sport experience should not be seen as a return on investment. It's best seen as a gift, right? You don't sign up for a gym membership and expect to get some return on investment. You go for the experience. It's about the journey. It's not about the destination. So can we educate the parents to have proper expectations for their players? And then at the end of the day, that you're doing the right thing for those players. And that kind of leads to the 6th task of a U.S. soccer coach, which is leadership. How do you lead yourself to lead others? Part of leading yourself is to educate yourself, to equip yourself with the tools that you need to create those environments, to educate parents, and ultimately to strive to keep kids healthy and active and in the game for life.
That's so good. And just one nugget from my personal experience, it's refreshing that the overwhelming majority of parents will get on board with you if you're willing to communicate
Absolutely. You'd be proactive.
Yes. Now, not all will. And like last season, I coached this U10 team, boys basketball team. There was a parent that didn't really get on board with it. And it was challenging. It was hard for his son, but the vast majority of the rest appreciated and were willing to get on board with making sure that it was an appropriate experience. They making sure, like literally we had 10 kids. It was like 5 in, 5 out. Like the kids played the whole game. And you know what those 10-year-olds told me? Is like, yeah, we love that everybody plays. Like they loved it. Yeah. Like they're like, yeah, we love that everybody plays equally here. And yeah, you'll hit a level where that stops. But at those young levels, like they come to play, they should get to play. And if you really like, man, a surefire way to have a really bad environment around your team, especially at that young age, is like playing time issues at that young age. And it's, again, like not the fault of those kids. Consider what it's like to be a 10-year-old and be sitting on the bench watching a game that you just want to be in.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and thanks to Zac for joining me. We'll be back next week with part 2 of this conversation. And as always, if you enjoyed the episode and want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, you can go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes. And Coach, if you enjoyed this episode or you enjoy the podcast in general, would you take a minute to either share with a coaching friend or leave us a review on Apple or Spotify? It goes a long way in helping us share with more coaches. And finally, don't forget to check out summercoachingseries.com to learn more or get access to our 2022 summer coaching series. It's full of practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching. That's summercoachingseries.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast.